to look at annulments and try to digest what an annulment is. As Catholics, if you get a divorce, if you've been married and get a divorce, people whisper they've got to get an annulment. But what is that annulment? I don't know how many of you can even begin to relate, but I think most of us know someone in our lifetime. It might be an aunt, an uncle, a parent even, that has gone through a divorce. Whether or not they've opted to take the annulment route is a very personal decision, and it's not an easy decision. It's something that takes a lot of effort. I have prepared, and you have in front of you a test, a quiz, if you will. We're going to be able to utilize some of that information to generate some questions as we begin to talk. But first, to get a feel, why do you have to go through this? If you go through a divorce, the court is saying, hey, it's over. You don't have to support one another. Well, that's not necessarily true. You're not living in the same house. They recognize you're no longer married. You're not responsible for the debt of the other person that they create after the fact. The courts say we're done. The courts are the one that gave us the licenses to get married. We as Catholics recognize that our faith is built in a very sacramentally based foundation. We have 7 sacraments that we work through, that we learn about as you're being catechized. And some of those sacraments are things that we repeat, recommended at least weekly. With that of the Eucharist, they recommend communion every week, if at all possible, and more than that, if you can make it happen. However, marriage is a sacrament. You can only be married one time. So if you can only be married one time, how is it that I was married a second time and I'm still a Catholic? I mean, if it says one, doesn't one mean one? What it really comes down to is, as we are dealing with a failed marriage, and we look at the process of possibly doing an annulment, we're not saying that the marriage civilly did not take place. We are trying to prove that the marriage was not a sacramental union, that there was something that existed prior to the I do that indicates to the tribunal that there was something lacking that did not allow that to be a sacramental marriage. Now, those things are called impediments. Impediments are things that exist that for one reason or another would not allow that marriage to be considered a sacramental marriage. Okay, let's consider one here. If I am not a baptized person and I have married, that marriage could not be considered sacramental because having never been in a state of grace through baptism, how could I possibly understand the importance or the fine nuance, if you will, of that marriage as being a sacramental marriage? So you must have lived the sacraments in order to participate in other sacraments. You're not going to be able to be baptized, you're not going to be able to take communion until you go through baptismal sacrament or until you have gone through the catechesis and confirmation. Well, that's not true either. Children get first communion before they get confirmed. But anyway, you understand what I'm saying here. We've got certain things that have happened. Well, you see, I was married at age 17. And my marriage didn't last a full 5 years. It was final. My divorce was final before, several months before my 5th anniversary would have taken place. My mother wasn't real smart then because she told me I really shouldn't be doing this, but she waived the rights of a parent to allow me to get married at that age. That was during the time that Vietnam was going on. I'm 66 years old, she was 67. And Vietnam was going on, and this young man was the only young man I had ever dated, and he was about to go to war. So, or into the military, let me rephrase that, into the military. So we wanted to get married before he left, so my mom signed off. She figured that we would elope to Tennessee if she didn't do it. So, and like I said, at that point in my life, haven't you all been there? That your parents just don't seem to be very intelligent, you know. As the older you get, the more you realize, maybe they weren't as dumb as you thought they were. I apologize to both of them in later years, but I was a Lutheran. I had converted to the church of my first spouse, and I was a Lutheran, and was baptized as a Lutheran, and we were married in the Lutheran church, and then when our marriage fell apart, you know, it was just, okay, fine. A while after that, I started dating what is now my husband. Saw him for a while, and John was a cradle Catholic. He never questioned my faith. He knew I didn't practice real strongly, but he accepted me as I was, warts and all. And it was some time later, I can't really remember how much later, that we ended up getting married in the Lutheran church. Never really gave it any consideration that he was married outside the church, and therefore really did not have the blessing of the church, if you will. But he had been in a marriage also and divorced. But after his divorce, he never took communion. He would always go to church. He didn't care whether it was a Lutheran church or the Catholic church, but he would always go to church every week. And I wasn't such a good churchgoer as he was, but he did go. Anyway, we had a daughter together who was baptized in a Lutheran church, was raised as a Lutheran, went to the Lutheran school, went to high school here in town after that, and you know, everything said Lutheran. When she left to go to college, I stopped going to church again. And John actually had been asked to be a deacon at the Lutheran church. He says, well, there's a little problem, I'm Catholic, so. He had been there so much, they didn't even know he wasn't a Lutheran. So, anyway, he started going back to the Catholic church when I stepped back from my faith. I had been going to church specifically to give my daughter a good church rearing foundation, something I did not have. I was not churched as a child. And I wanted to make sure that my daughter had that foundation. So that was the reason I was going to church. I really wasn't getting out of what I needed to get out of church. I had an emptiness about me, but I didn't recognize that. While she was in school, John attended noon mass at Old St. Bede's downtown. And it was wonderful. He'd get up, he'd read the newspaper, we'd have coffee, we'd have breakfast, and then he'd get himself ready and off to church he'd go. And when he came home, I'd have dinner ready. And I just had that hour and a half off, is the way I looked at it. And I enjoyed it, really, really enjoyed it. Then he was coming home and he'd say, there was the cutest little boy sitting in the pew in front of me today. And when it came time to show the sign of peace, or there was something, you know, there was always some little tidbit that he was bringing home. One Sunday morning, instead of getting up and doing my routine of laundry and what have you, I got my shower, got ready, and was getting dressed when he walked in. He said, what are you doing? I said, I'm getting dressed for church. He goes, oh, we going to St. Peter's? I said, no, I'm going to go with you. I haven't missed church but a handful of times since. That was the beginning. It was several months later that I said to John, and I mean several, probably close to a year, I said, John, we were driving home after church, I said, John, I think I want to join the Catholic Church. He said, are you sure? I could hear his tone, are you sure? I said, no, but I think so. I said, what do I need to do? He said, well, I think we need to call Father Quinn and set up an appointment. Guess what I found out at that appointment? I found out that Catholics do recognize marriages from other churches, and I always thought they didn't. If you're married, I thought Catholics were snobs. If you did not get married in a Catholic church, your marriage was not recognized. So now change that one to false. It's one of your questions. I found out that yes, they absolutely do recognize a Protestant being married by the rules and regulations of their church. They certainly do recognize those marriages. It's when a Catholic gets married in one of those other churches that you're no longer following the guidelines of your church. Your church indicates you must be married in the church and there must be a priest witnessing this marriage. Or you have to have special dispensation still with a priest witnessing that marriage in order to make it valid in the church. If you are a Catholic and you're married at a Lutheran church and you don't have all your ducks lined up, that marriage is not recognized as a legitimate marriage, as a, forget the word legitimate, sacramental marriage in your church. Okay, got that? You can be married civilly, but only if you are married in the church by a priest being at least a witness in that union, with special dispensation. If you do not get married at a Catholic church, you do not have a marriage that is considered sacramental. So, if you haven't been married yet, plan on a Catholic wedding with a priest being present, okay? Those who have married down at the courthouse by Judge Hyman, who is a Catholic, that marriage is not recognized as a sacramental marriage. And in fact, it's called lack of form. So it's one lack of form. You did not follow the guidelines of your church. There are only two churches, the education that I have been given to be a field associate, there are only two churches that actually have very severe guidelines. The Catholic Church is one, Greek Orthodox is the other. Other than that, they may say they have a preference that you do something or so-and-so, but it's not the same as like the Catholic faith. Kind of follow me on that? Okay. So, as a Lutheran, being married in a Lutheran church, the church recognized my marriage as being sacramental. In order for me to join the church, I have to make my marriage to my present husband sacramental. Remember, I'm married to a Catholic who has been in a previous marriage, and I have been in a previous marriage. Fortunately for John, who is my husband, his former spouse is the one that did the work. She had already gone through an annulment. And I can remember his anger, and I do mean anger, when he got notification and he was reading that letter that came in the mail that she was getting an annulment. His comment was, "What the hell does this do to my children?" He had 2 children by that marriage. And all he could think about is those children are now going to be illegitimate because that marriage was annulled. Wrong. It will not make your children illegitimate. What it does, the church recognizes civilly you were married. Sacramentally, you were not. There's the difference there. So, as I'm trying to join the Catholic Church, I have to go through an annulment because it does recognize me as a Lutheran being married and says every union is sacramental until we prove otherwise. Several things. If there had been a pregnancy and we got married because of the pregnancy, that is an impediment. That would have that wasn't the case, but that could have been the reason. Having a premarital sexual relationship and then morally feeling I am bound to enter into marriage because I am no longer pure. And if you can prove that you have that kind of teaching and background, that would be an impediment. If you find out that one of you has some emotional, things aren't just real solid mentally for one of you, that can be an impediment. there are usually things that, even if you don't recognize it ahead of time, it kind of becomes apparent as the failure comes along, as to what impediments are. Part of my role as a field associate is to help people recognize where those impediments might exist. And as people come to me, my whole role in this picture and the training that I have gone through with the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, specifically the Metropolitan Tribunal, I have to go through continual upgrading or continuing education, if you will, to make sure that my understanding is accurate and I am prepared to help people navigate those waters. When I went through this, I didn't have a navigator. I did not have a field associate like me. They had people that were advocates that worked for the tribunal. And my entire annulment was handled by phone between a very kind lady that I love dearly to this day. She was so very kind, so very helpful. But basically, it was left up to the priest to start the work, pass me off to the advocate, and then the advocate would pull me the rest of the way through. So I just was kind of out there floating. Well, they did a little reorganization and started assigning some of these duties that really don't require a priest or a religious individual to do the work. It's knowing what paperwork needs to be completed under what circumstances, and that's my role. And to advise those that seek my help to have an understanding of what they can expect as they are approaching the annulment itself, and as they are, so that, there may be a surprise. Probably one of the greater surprises is the fact that this isn't easy. You've committed to someone, people that go through the annulment process have committed to someone with every intention of spending the rest of their lives with this individual. You don't go into it thinking, oh, if this doesn't last for a month or two, that's more. That's not what we do as human beings. We really feel we know where we're headed. We really are approaching it as if, it's going to be a lifetime commitment. And then when it fails, we fail. There's a lot of emotion tied up in that. And as you're filling out the paperwork, those emotions are bubbling back to the surface. The disappointment in oneself, the disappointment in one's ex-spouse, former spouse, all of those things, the anger comes back again. So if you know of anyone who has gone through an annulment, understand they really, really wanted to get back in right with the church, where they wouldn't have been able to do what they needed to do, because it's not an easy task. Father Clem told me at our last meeting before I began my paperwork, he said, Sherry, I've never obviously gone through this before, but I'm told this is a very healing process. Well, as I was completing my questionnaire, working on that questionnaire, feeling the anger, feeling the tears welling up as I'm having to relive these things, owning up to my own inadequacies in that relationship, it was anything but healing at that moment. I can tell you at the end, when the annulment was granted, which took me 2 years to get my annulment, nearly 2 years to get the annulment, and at the end, it was truly a healing experience. Really, really like the weight of the world. I didn't realize I was carrying as much weight from that marriage as I had. But one of the things I tell the people that I work with is, as you are answering these questions, don't worry about what kind of light it puts you in. If you're answering this truly from the heart, and it shines blame on you, put it down. Empty your soul, put it down. Don't try to make yourself shine when you really shouldn't shine, okay? Because that does your soul no good, but they're going to see through that as they're reading through your answers anyway. They being the tribunal, the men that are priests, or I don't know if there's anyone other than just priest level, if there's like a bishop or someone that might be there reading, I don't know. But they're going to read through that if you're trying to cover things up. The marriage failed. There is nothing that can undo that. But an annulment is not about finding who's at fault for a failed marriage. It's not a fault finding. What we're trying to do, remember, is to build the foundation to prove that it was not a sacramental marriage to start with. That there was something lacking that did not allow that to be a sacramental marriage. If you marry someone who has been married before, and you are a Catholic, your marriage would not be valid because it would be called a legamen. Your spouse has a prior commitment to someone. So it could be that a Protestant who was married before marries you who has never been married and you are a Catholic. That Protestant might actually have to go through an annulment because of their first marriage. Basically, that's what John was getting into with me. But when John was divorced, but still single, I've shared with you that he did not participate in communion. He didn't participate in anything other than attending Sunday services. Could he have? A divorced individual, not married, could he have taken communion? That was one of your questions, I think, wasn't it? What do you think? Yes, he could have. I got some yes, and I got some no. Fact is, yes, he could have. Getting a divorce is not a sin. It's getting married afterwards that complicates your life. And at that point in time, you would need to be talking to your priest about whether or not you can take communion. If in fact I have, I'm a communion minister. I'm pretty active in St. Louis, so you may recognize my face. But I am a communion minister, and I am also an individual who works with people thinking about getting annulments. I probably have talked to as many people that have thought about it, that actually went through it. I have people that might take 3 or 4 years to actually complete the process. There's no time limit on it. You can do it whenever you choose to do it. But bottom line is, if you come into my line and you're one of the people that I know that's in a marriage that is not within the guidelines of the church, I'm not refusing you. That's between you and God and Father Clem. If Father Clem is one of the priests in our community that truly believes that the annulment process needs to be there and it serves a good purpose, and he supports those individuals seeking annulment. He is very pastoral when it comes to helping people navigate through those trials, tribulations that you deal with. He's very, very good at that. But he will very quickly hand you off to me to help get the paperwork done. I'm just telling you, he's very, very supportive about that. So, I feel like I've gone through quite a bit, but yet not hardly anything. Let's talk about some of these questions, okay? Let's see why. If you have any truths marked here, change your answers. Every statement on here is false. How many have false? Yay!
Well, it's from blank, so technically no.
Number one, a divorced person is automatically excommunicated. Obviously, I said they were all false. No, you're not excommunicated. Although, believe it or not, that came up again. I mean, that's one of those heads that keeps coming up out of the murky waters, you know. People think that once you're divorced, you can't take communion, that you're being excommunicated. I mean, I actually heard a priest say that in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. And as soon as I got out of church, I texted Kathy Davis James and said, "Have you ever heard?" She said, "No." And it is not right. So, no, your problem is not with the divorce. It's only if you divorce and you intend never, ever, ever, ever to remarry again, you don't have to do an annulment. You only need the annulment if you hope to someday enter into another relationship, a permanent relationship. An annulment makes children illegitimate. No. I will share this little story with you. When I started, which was in 2003, I think was when I first became a field associate. So I've been doing this for 10 plus years. When my husband finally, I have work, I call this work stuff, okay? I have work stuff, I have a file, a drawer that I keep everything in. My husband doesn't care to go there, and I'm thankful for that, but, you know, in order for me to help people, I've got to keep a certain amount of information. And when he actually saw what I went through to get my annulment in 99, finished in 2001, spring of 2001, he made the comment, "I never realized how much work Carol had to go through in order to get the annulment." And he made the comment that he had a newfound respect for her because of the efforts she went through, because he said, "I don't think I could have done it." So, only rich people can get annulments. That goes to fees, I think. No, that's not true. You can get an annulment and not pay a penny. There are recommended fees for a formal case, which is what I had to go through. It's not a annulment, it's not a lack of form. There's a little more effort to it than that. That is $675 total, and they estimate that covers approximately 1/3. Well, when you're a young person and you've got 2 children and you're trying to keep bills paid and everything else, there's not a lot of residual money. I can remember the days when we had young children, and all your fees can be waived. Every penny of it can be waived. Or they'll work out a payment plan, so it's kind of like making a car payment or a payment or something like that. So, depending on where you're at. Here's me. Protestant marriages are not recognized by the Catholic Church because they are outside the church. That was where I thought I was until I went through the That is also false. Your former spouse has to agree before you can get an annulment. No, your former spouse will be notified that you're going through the process, but they don't have to agree to it. And in fact, if they want to participate and argue against it, they are welcome to do so. But it will not stop the process. It might alter the end result, but I have never found an annulment yet where the spouse participated. Usually it's a Catholic coming and they've been in a marriage with, even if it was married in a Catholic church, might be a Protestant, and it's kind of one of those things that they could care less whether it goes through or not, you know, kind of where I was, but they will be notified. If you know someone who has like protective orders and it's a real secure thing, those situations can be addressed. Location, telephone numbers, addresses, things like that. If there is just cause because of maybe an abusive relationship or something, to keep that information away from the former spouse. They still will be notified, but they won't be told where you're at. And remember that all of the annulments filed here actually are filed out of Indianapolis, so they know you're in Indiana, but that would be all they would know. So don't hesitate to tell someone it doesn't matter that you don't want them to know. They can keep that a secret, okay? That's not an excuse not to know.
So the consent says that you don't need a consent, but you don't need any paperwork or any support from the former spouse.
No. You don't have to have, not to make the annulment go through, no. My former spouse was notified by mail that I was going through the process. He was Lutheran, if you recall. He got it, and my husband picked up the phone and called him because he had told me he would do that, and he hadn't, and now the letters are coming out, and he had just gotten the letter that day, and John said, she's joining the Catholic Church, and in order to do that, she has to annul the marriage. And he said, I figured that's what was going on. I mean, it was no big deal. We're talking 20 plus years, difference here. It wasn't like it was 2 weeks after the divorce or anything like that. By the way, I cannot speak to an individual who is still in the process of getting a divorce. If the divorce is not final, I cannot even talk to them. I mean, it's just, I can't give them paperwork, nothing. It has to be complete. An affair is sufficient grounds for an annulment. Well, in actuality, these are things that have to happen before the I do, not after the I do. And if a marriage has broken up because someone has had an affair or multiple affairs, usually, if you can look, hindsight is just wonderful. And if you can look back and determine, if you really look back, there's probably some of that shenanigans going on before the marriage too, that maybe that individual truly wasn't being faithful to start with. There are some of those facades that can be built that way. So even though the affair happened after the marriage, there may be signs before the marriage that there were things going on. And if we kind of talk about it a little bit, usually we can identify what those are. An annulment is just a Catholic divorce. Not really. An annulment declares the marriage was not a sacramental marriage to start with. It's not endorsing what civilly has already taken place. It's just saying, Christ was not a part of this union. Even though he may be a part of your children, he wasn't a part of that union. There was something there missing. Divorce is a sin. We talked about that. No, it is not a sin. Obviously, the church doesn't want divorces to take place, which is one of the reasons why you go through marriage prep and all that. But who of us has not made a poor decision somewhere in their life? You think you know what you're doing, but either the situation is totally changed and they're not the individual you thought they were, or maybe you're not the individual you thought you were. Maybe you were redesigning yourself to meet their needs rather than being yourself. An annulment is where the church determines who's at fault on a failed marriage. It's anything but that. They don't talk about whose fault it is. The only time that might even be considered is in something called a Pauline privilege. And that's where you have two people that were not baptized, but you now have one of these individuals, and they were married, and you now have one of these individuals that wants to join the Catholic Church. Your case goes to Rome, and they say because you want to become Catholic and you were not baptized, we're going to not annul, but dissolve that marriage and allow you to become a Catholic after you get baptized. But you cannot be the reason for the failed marriage. So if you were having an illicit affair with 14 different people, and all of a sudden it breaks out in the newspaper, don't file for poly-privilege. It probably won't work, okay? You can start the process as soon as you're separated. No, your divorce must be final. One of the documents that I have to collect is the divorce decree. I need the marriage license. I need baptismal certificates. I need the divorce decree. You know, all of that showing where it started, where it ended, and in fact that you were a baptized Catholic.
So you can't have an annulment without a civil divorce?
You have to have a civil divorce before you can do the annulment. Now, there is a civil annulment, and that's not what we're talking about here. A civil annulment, and I'm not even sure what those requirements are. You would need to see an attorney for that. You must be divorced before you go through your annulment. I can't even talk to you until your divorce is final.
Aren't those two separate things? Annulment is the sacramental aspect, whereas the divorce is the social and the financial aspect.
You get married, you can't get married in the Catholic Church before you have a wedding license. So it's similar to that. So that you're kind of recognized as legal as well. That
Exactly, exactly. The church does also not want to annul something that maybe you're going to be able to pull together again. And until you are physically, formally divorced, there's always that hope that a reunion could take place and that marriage might be able to survive. I mean, we all, out of 43 years of marriage, not every year has been ideal. We've had our ups and downs, we've had our little skirmishes. But, and it really ticks me off that he won't argue with me. I'm up for a good fight. You're right, and I think that's what he said.
You guys already beating now, bad enough. Paper punches and go on.
So, civilly, you must have your divorce before a church annulment can take place. Civilly, you must have your divorce. Does that make sense?
Okay, that's news. Yeah,
Okay.
makes sense.
Okay.
looks like
Exactly.
Let's see. If you were married and divorced 3 times, you only need to seek an annulment on the last marriage. No. You have to seek an annulment on every marriage. And then quite frankly, the most I've had is 4. I've had one lady with 4 marriages. And that was my very first case. I mean, baptism by fire, I'll tell you. And I was so afraid I was going to do something wrong anyway. And she was such a sweet lady. But we tend sometimes, if we can't figure out where we're making our mistakes, we tend to repeat our mistakes. So, yeah, it's just, that was rough. When you tell them, not only do you have to do it once, but you have to do it for every single one.
What if the second wife and the third wife are the same way?
Well,
I know somebody that's in that predicament.
I understand. What if the second and the third wife are the same? I am thinking you are still going to have to file for each
Well, I figured
case.
you would.
Yeah,
Just,
but I would be able to verify that. I would be able to verify that. I just don't know that one right off the top of my head.
I still don't know what he was thinking.
Okay. You cannot receive the Eucharist until your annulment is complete. Obviously, if you are not married and you're divorced, obviously you continue taking the Eucharist. If you have entered into a civil marriage, at that point in time, you're kind of on shaky ground. As I indicated earlier, as the Eucharistic minister, I'm not going to turn you away. However, it's probably a discussion you should have with Father Clam. I personally, the teaching of the church indicates no, you should not. Because at that point you're living in sin. You're not in a sacramental marriage, therefore you're living in sin as a Catholic. So it's something that really should be addressed to one of the priests. Your former spouse must participate in the annulment process in order for it to complete? No. I've had more than one person, and I'm not talking just women here, I'm talking men as well, that, you're going to send something and you're going to invite them to participate, and it's going to sit on their desk for, a billion years, because anything they can do to give me grief, they're going to enjoy doing it. That grief cannot be delivered in that manner. If the notice is sent to them and inviting the individual to participate in the process, they are welcome to participate in it. However, if they don't hear back from this individual, they will probably send a follow-up letter, unless they stated in the first letter, giving them a deadline that if you intend to participate, you have until this date. Once that date passes, if they have not responded at all, things begin on without their participation. But they are continually notified as things are moving forward. And they would be notified at the end. One thing I guess I really should have mentioned. Just like when my husband's former spouse filed for her annulment, he was annulled as well. So he didn't have to go through that process. He then was free to marry me. I wasn't free to marry him, but he was free to marry me. So both of you don't have to file and go through this. One filing, if it gets granted, it's granted for both of you, so you don't have to. And are you guaranteed an annulment just by filing? No. I only know of one, for me, the people I have worked with, I only know of one person that went through the annulment process and was not granted an annulment. And this particular person didn't take her questionnaire seriously. The questionnaire is long answer essay. It is not short answer essay. You don't just say yes, no, unless that, were there children born of this marriage? That was either yes or no. If it's yes, so many, but and details. But if it's no, then the answer is no. But, did your former spouse remain faithful during your marriage? No. They don't want just to know. They want expounding on situations. They are looking for a long answer essay on these questions. Hey, give me just a minute there. What they're doing by asking these questions, they are building the foundation upon which they are going to build your case for lack of sacramental existence within that union. Okay, so I felt like, as I was doing my questionnaire, I felt like I am part of a psychological survey, and I'm paying. And I'm paying for the right to be in this survey. So I was going, why do they care if my parents went to church? It has nothing to do with my marriage. Well, yes, it did. It really does. Was I treated differently than my siblings? Yes or no? Why do they care? Does it make a difference? Yes, it does. Because things that happen here affect everything down here. And everything down here affects everything up here. So it's a building kind of thing. Nick, you had a question?
Yeah, so in the case where she was denied the annulment, she reapplied.
She was able to appeal.
Okay.
And when she handed her questionnaire to me for me to ship to Indy with all of her documents, she said, I'm allowing my witnesses, which you have to have, witnesses that can confirm your own testimony, because that's what they refer to it. Your questionnaire becomes your testimony about your situation. She said, I am allowing my witnesses to supply the information. And I said, are you sure you want to do that? Because I can't see this coming out good. And she goes, they'll tell it. They know what was going on. Well, guess what? Surprise! And a couple years later, I saw her at church, and she told me that she had gone through an appeal. And the appeal really is more of a, I probably didn't give you enough information, let me try it again kind of thing. So it's not a for never after, are you allowed to even try?
Okay.
You know, I'm sure somewhere along the line that you could get to that point. I mean, if you really sat down and talked one-on-one with someone, they could tell you, if you were honest and open and really pouring out your soul to it, they could tell you whether or not, particularly the advocates in Minneapolis, in the tribunal, they would tell you whether there was any hope or not. I know of a friend who told me that she had an acquaintance that the annulment was refused. Most of the time in Indy, they won't even accept your filing if they can't find the foundation. They will just decline and tell you this is what you're going to have to provide more information on in order for it to go through. So they're not going to send it all the way to the end. And this may have been what happened to this one lady. They read her testimony, read the witness testimony, but there's not enough here, you know, to really build that foundation. Once that annulment is granted, it immediately is whisked off to another diocese for review. They want to make sure all the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed, and someone didn't pay off someone to get it to go through. In other words, no, the wealthy don't necessarily always get it. It's okay. So it's a process of reaffirming that the rights of the former spouse have been upheld, and they kind of play devil's advocate, if you will, trying to find things that maybe should have been looked at before an annulment is granted. I have never heard of any of my cases, and I really think Indy is very, very thorough about what they do. I've never heard of one getting through Indy, being sent off and then declined and sent back. So I tell my people, once you get the letter that says, you know, this is being sent for review, it's about a month away, maybe 6 weeks away before you get final affirmation that it's done. Because once they send it out, it's pretty much done.
And then in the case where it was declined, say it was declined for the woman in the marriage, the man could not have tried to apply for annulment then at that point.
I suppose he could have.
Really? Even though, because it's the same year.
Because his information may be different. Remember I said you got to empty your soul? Maybe I wasn't willing to do that. Maybe I haven't progressed far enough that I can claim and acknowledge the role that I played in the failure,
Okay.
sacramentally or otherwise. And so it's possible that maybe he really is the one's having grounds and not her.
Okay. So it would be possible once it's...
I think it would be. I think it would be. Bottom line is this, the church doesn't want you floundering around out here.
Yeah.
They really don't. They want to help. I'm hoping our new pope is going to really help out the annulment process. I mean, there would be nothing that would make me happier than to have to learn a whole new set of rules, just so it would be streamlined. There were so many Catholics telling me as I was going through this process, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. Do it. And all I can tell you is as I was going through the process, I knew I was doing the right thing, and it was the Spirit moving me, folks. I mean, I know now, I can say that now. I didn't totally understand it then. But if the Holy Spirit hadn't been alive in me, pushing me, I may have stepped back. I went through RCIA twice. I talked to Father Clem the first time on the 17th of March, 1999. I started RCIA in the fall of that year. knowing I wasn't going to be able to complete it. The following year, I went through RCIA again, but this time I got to finish. It's a long, tedious process. I would not have had to have gone through RCIA twice, but I knew I had something special in my heart, and I really needed to keep that fire going. Because for the first time in my life, I really was doing something I wanted to do. I was wanting to go to church. I was wanting to participate fully in the service, and I couldn't do that unless I went through the processes I was going through. If you're already a Catholic, you don't have that carrot dangling out there. You know, not really, not the way I did. And maybe it's a little harder. I know that Catholics, we've lost several that have now moved on to either the Lutheran Church or to the Episcopal Church because of marriage situations. So it saddens me. It really saddens me. But I was fortunate that I had it. Yeah, it was a good day when I got my paperwork. I just sat down and rolled. There in my office, my husband brought the letter over to me. Said he got some mail. He brought me a sandwich. And the letter. And a fountain Coke. You know how wonderful a fountain Coke is when all you get is canned, you know? And he brought the letter, a sandwich, a fountain Coke, and a bouquet of flowers. And he says, I hope this is what you've been waiting on. And that was only probably 6 weeks prior to the Easter Vigil, and I was on the verge of thinking I wasn't going to be able to do it again. So, it's just taking me long. I have yacked endlessly. Nick has had a few questions.
I have another question.
Yes.
So, if like your first husband was deceased by the time that you had wanted to get an annulment, would you be like off the hook?
You're not going to have to do an annulment if your former spouse is deceased.
Okay, so that's what I thought.
It's a whole new story when you have a deceased spouse.
My grandparents were that way. My grandma's husband passed and my grandpa's wife passed, and then they was married anyway.
What so many, not so, I shouldn't say so many, what we have seen happen is that Cousin Ethel tried to get an annulment back in 42, and they wouldn't give it to her because she didn't have the money. Doesn't work that way. Lucinda tried to get an annulment because Granny was pushing her, and the priest wouldn't even talk to her. My guess is Lucinda didn't ever talk to the priest about it to start with. Any one of these things, and this is how rumors get started. Bottom line is this. There is a basic data sheet that gets filled out for every person. Now, in some instances, Father Clem will meet, or a few weeks ago, Father Doug would complete this form with an individual, or they would give this to the individual to complete, but it always ends up in my lap. And what it comes down to is this is gathering the information about your situation that it supplies me with enough detail, not your innermost secrets, not the inner workings of a failed marriage, but rather sterilely provides me with the information to determine, is it a formal case? Mine was a formal case. Is it a legamen? Remember the prior bond where you had a marriage and you had someone married before? Is it a lack of form, a Catholic married outside the regulations of the church? Or is it someone lacking baptism and therefore it's a Pauline privilege or a favor of the faith? There are 4 different avenues that we can look at, and it all is based on the information on this basic data sheet. This basic data sheet I have scanned in. I can email to people. So if you have a friend or someone who is in a marriage situation that is trying to determine whether they even want to try this or not, in order to get back into the church. All they have to do is start with this form, and I think I'll just pass it around if that's okay. And you can take a quick look and determine it really is not, it does ask a little bit on the back, kind of a summarize, you know, what was wrong with the marriage, and that's where you can get, some people might be talking about drug addiction or alcohol addiction or infidelity or abusive relationships. It's not meant to be detailed. I don't care if that's not even filled in. It can be left empty. My role remains the same, okay? Anything that is shared with me by anyone that I work with is strictly confidential. One of the things that I have learned about being a Catholic is that when it comes to doing things that I'm not supposed to do, because I have to go to Father Clem for absolution, I tend to think twice. So before I'm going to sit down and share information, confidential information, with somebody about an annulment situation, ain't going to happen, folks. First of all, this is a ministry I believe I've been called for. I am told by the people I have worked with that I make it look much more palatable. It's not as scary. They feel like there's someone they can call on and ask questions of without being judged. I live in a glass house, people. I'm not throwing rocks, I'll tell you that right now. But it is a situation that you have to be under trust. Now, how much information you share to me can be very minimal. The information you share in your questionnaire, which I don't read unless I have been told specifically, I want you to read this. And then I usually say, what section? Because I don't want to read a life history here. Then at that point I will read it, but only if I'm asked to do so by the person that has completed the questionnaire. So once we get that information filled out, then I can determine the paperwork that's needed. Out of the 4 different kinds of paperwork, what do you need to complete and get back to me to begin the process? The hardest one to go through will be the formal case because it's got a very long questionnaire. Tim, you shared that you have gone through an annulment. Where did your annulment take place?
Diocese of Toledo.
Okay. Did they have a long questionnaire? Because different dioceses.
I don't think anything about the process was short.
It was.
And so it was
Okay.
rather long.
Okay. I'm thinking our questionnaire is like 40 plus questions in length. And it goes through childhood, it goes for both parties.
It's very awkwardly thorough about random stuff that you would think has absolutely nothing to do with it. But having been through the process, it definitely does. And you can kind of tie some things together and be like, oh, well, that's what's going on here. So it can kind of pretty entertaining to a certain extent, I guess. But it was like a good 2-3 weeks of trying to get through it. Because, like I said, it's a long form essay. Each question, I mean, and rightfully so, because it's a process and it should be respected. But
Yes.
it's an hour or 2 per question, so.
I'm not sure I spent that much time.
But because it's not only you that you're recommending the questions for, because theoretically your spouse is not participating fully in this process. So you
have to
answer as best you know about their case with all of these random questions that you did anything that you know had to do with you, let alone then. A lot of stuff you may not know them that well, and some of how thorough some of these questions get.
Well, and after it's been 20 plus years, that was real exciting. I will share kind of a comedic kind of thing. One of the things that I was unable to remember is birthday. I could not remember his birth. I knew the year, and I was thinking it was in May, but I could not come up with the date of his birth. Could not. Amazing. Things you
have the grounds for divorce, which is adultery. What's the biblical foundation of annulment?
If Christ is truly a part, and I'm not canon law expert by any means here. If Christ is truly a part of, and we're assuming Christ is a part of every union, of every marriage, then at that point in time, there's no way you're going to be able to annul marriage. However, if you can prove that there were impediments that existed prior to your getting married, then they can say it was not a true sacramental marriage. It was a marriage, but it was not a true sacramental marriage. And I'm afraid that's about as deep as I'm going to be able to take it.
Can you give a few examples of the impediments?
Sure. Let me give you my situation. I married at 17, and this came out as a part of my, I knew my age when I got married, but the information I'm sharing with you now came out as the soul searching of the questionnaire took place. And then I'm not sure I can give you the exact impediment that they called it, but I can paraphrase it. I was married at 17. I lived in a household where my father was a very tender, caring, loving, nurturing individual. And I had a mother who thoroughly believed it's her way or the highway. She was quick with the hand and other implements, wooden spoons. I don't think she ever used fly swatter. I think that was way too easy. But she raised her children the way she was raised, whose mother was, it's her way or the highway. My mother found it very, very difficult to simply say thank you for a gift. As a basket weaver, even as an adult basket weaver, I gave many baskets to my mother as a gift. And I don't care how well the craftsmanship was on it, how beautiful that basket might be, it would always be, oh, that's very pretty. Too bad it's not blue or taller or shorter or square instead of round. I mean, there was always some critique, so I never measured up. See what I'm saying there? Out of my witnesses, my brother was one. It came to the surface that all three of us married very quickly. My sister married the week after graduation from high school, and my brother married probably 9 months after graduation. And what really came out of that is that all three of us were leaving the house as quickly as we could to get out of that environment. So, my mother since has passed. She died in May of this year. We made amends before she was gone. I mean, it became apparent I had to forget and move on. But for the purpose of example I give you, the examination of my testimony, the examination of my brother's testimony, and my cousin's testimony provided the tribunal with sufficient evidence to say that I was acutely underage and living in an environment I really, really needed to get out of. And it was repeated by my siblings. And that was the impediment they filed against. So in other words, I was way too young to be able to make the choice, which, yeah. But the other things existed too, which is the reason I say everything down here comes up to the newer and older things. It's the things there that not only did I experience it, but so did my brother and sister experience trying to get out soon. And I am degreed, however, that came after I was in my second marriage and had my daughter. I quit work as a legal secretary and went to school full-time. So, you know, I never even considered college. I just considered getting married, being a housewife. That's what I intended to do for this. Having a pregnancy would be an impediment. And I think back to the 60s. Okay, I mean, pretend you could think back to the 60s. In the 60s, I mean, women now have children without being in marriage, and it's really not viewed the way it was back then. You know, back then it was they had to get married. You know, it was a shotgun wedding kind of thing. Well, back in the 60s when I was at that era, that's kind of the way it was viewed. It was kind of a taboo thing. It wasn't viewed the way it is today, not as casual as it is today. And that would have, for my era, been an impediment. I have had people tell me or share with me that they were considering, you know, they were going through the marriage process and it was getting right down to the wire and they knew it was a mistake. But the invitations had already gone out. Money had already been paid to the reception hall. The cake has been ordered. The gifts have been arriving. And they just had, you know, the day of the wedding, their father would say, "Are you sure this is what you want to do?" And they go forward. That's an impediment that exists before. Does that help a little bit? Yes, ma'am.
I don't really know how to ask my question, I guess, but I guess if an impediment is trying to find some reason that Christ is not a part of that marriage, like you said that an affair is not sufficient grounds, but if unfaithfulness had happened beforehand, but those two people had gone through forgiveness with each other and still decided to be married, does that mean Christ wasn't in their marriage? Like if these impediments were happening, but they stayed married all their lives, I guess that's what I'm wondering.
I'm on shaky ground here, okay? But here's my gut reaction to that. If there were things that existed at the time we entered into the marriage, the forgiveness was there, and the marriage existed, the marriage went on, then in my opinion, I would think that Christ had to be there or it wouldn't happen. That's where I would come. That would be a good question to pose to Father today. I can see you all lined up this door. She didn't answer a thing, she just caused more questions. I have, and I don't mean to shut you off, but I have some handouts here. And in here, on one of the pages, we love going to other churches when we're traveling. And we found this in another church. I picked one up and then I ordered a bunch of them. And one of the things that's in here, which you're going to recognize, is a series of questions. And there are 8 questions here, all of which are false. And some of these have been lifted and put into the questions here. Plus, I've added to that the items that I have heard that just totally blow that away. So, did you both want one? But this also discusses the impediment situation, which may help a little bit. Here, if not, just hang on to the extra.
Taking us to lunch tomorrow.
Other
I told my
questions?
friends that what I was doing. They're like, oh, it's awesome. So it's awesome. Can you better here?
Yes, sir.
Press always gives the celebrity divorces, but since you have been a field associate, what's the average cost of a civil divorce?
Oh, I have no idea on civil divorce.
You know why divorce is so expensive? Oh, was it?